you view the haul the Miami Dolphins pulled off in the 2025 draft? They started with 10 selections. They ended up with 8 players, along with some undrafted players. Right now, Simon Clancy got you ready for the draft. We did about 3 Dolphins In Depth podcasts with Simon breaking down the draft. I highly respect Simon's view, the work that he puts in. We talk back and forth about prospects, and now it's time to share with you our first chat about the haul in terms of the draft class. Simon, let me see how we're going to get out the gate here. We know they made a trade that gave away pretty much all of their draft picks in the meat of the draft. They moved up to get Jonah Savanea. I think I know how to say it. I'm not sure. They traded away their 4th round pick for a future 3rd round pick from the Houston Texans. And they made some selections that brought you 3 nose tackles, 1 guard, 1 safety, 1 running back, 1 quarterback, and 1 cornerback. Simon, how would you assess how the Dolphins performed in the 2025 NFL draft?
I always feel like I come across as kind of Captain Negative, but I didn't love it. I've got to say, it really felt to me, and it's so unusual, Omar, it really felt to me like a draft from a guy who feels complete confidence in his position as a general manager. It was exactly the opposite of what I thought it would be. I thought it would be big and bold and kind of statement oriented. And actually it felt flabby in the middle and loose towards the end. I was actually more joyful about the undrafted guys than I was about the overall kind of class.
Really?
I think there's some really good. I think there's 4 or 5 guys who've got a legitimate shot of making that roster from the undrafted class. There were players I liked, certainly, but overall, I just felt it was a little bit kind of, there's 2 guys who are obviously going to start, and then there's just a bunch of guys. And I think it could have been, there's 1 long-term player, I think, in Phillips. But I just think that there were opportunities perhaps to do things that they just didn't pull the trigger on for whatever reason. And I look specifically at, the quarterback situation with Ewers versus Shedeur Sanders and the opportunity to take Sanders and bring him in. And I think, they probably missed on that. So I think...
Hold on. While I hear what you're saying, we asked that during the draft. Chris Grier said they had a nice, lengthy discussion about it in the 5th round. And then 1 pick before Shedeur Sanders comes off the board to the Cleveland Browns, they selected Jordan Phillips.
Yeah.
So clearly, they had a discussion about it, decided that he was not going to be that pick what was Jordan Phillips' selection. Decided he wasn't going to be that first of 3 5th-round picks.
Yeah.
And here's my thought process on that. 1, you got to be comfortable and careful about the type of people that you put into your locker room, especially when you have a fragile locker room. And I would argue to you and to those who do or don't know the team, this is probably one of the most fragile locker rooms in the NFL. From the standpoint, you don't have any leaders. Your biggest alpha male wants out. You've got a head coach that can discipline his players. And do you really want a diva coming to be in your quarterback room?
I think there have been an awful lot of kind of overblown narratives about Sanders. I think that he is not a bad kid. I don't think he is a character issue in the same way. Look, we live in a society where, and we said this before, I said this on the last podcast, if Hannibal Lecter had run a 4.2, we'd have said he had an eating disorder. And we've literally just watched a draft where the Atlanta Falcons traded a 1st-round pick for James Pierce, who's got significant off-the-field issues. We just saw Mike Green, who admitted to 2 sexual assaults, or admitted that he'd been involved in 2 sexual assaults at the combine, which is why he fell into the 2nd round. And yet a guy who, this is a discussion for a different time perhaps, but I do find it really interesting and odd that it really felt, in a way, it felt a little bit Kaepernick-esque in terms of how the league decided that they were going to deal with this situation. A lot of kind of white ownership, conservative in their politics, who just sort of made a statement that this guy wasn't going to embarrass the Shield. This guy wasn't going to dictate the odds in a league where player power is so huge. I just felt like this was going to be a situation where, it was a slap on the wrist. You are not going to dictate where you're going to go to. You're not going to tell us this. You're not going to tell us that. And as it pertains to Miami, look, I think, and we talked about this multiple times, that Sanders is the perfect point and shoot quarterback. He's the perfect quarterback for this scheme, for this system. And I think when you're sat there in the 5th round, the quarterback room that is as precipitous as it is in terms of the injury issues as it pertains to the starter, and you are looking at potentially a situation where if he gets hurt again, then, do you pull the plug completely? There is a runway for that in a year's time in terms of getting out of that contract. And you have a kid who fits the offensive scheme, who legitimately in the 5th round, you tend not to be able to find long-term starters. And I think that's a guy who could potentially come in and be a long-term starter. So I just think if you're going to use a pick on Quinn Ewers, but not a pick on Sanders, and Ewers, that kind of country club attitude that Ewers has that was described to me by scouts. I described him in the draft book as Sea Biscuit without the C or the biscuit, a guy with kind of marginal arm strength, a guy that, really hasn't been the sum of his parts. And almost Ewers felt to me like a wasted kind of tokenistic pick at that point, when you could have taken guys like a Carl McCord, like Curtis Rourke potentially, who, may well have pushed for starting jobs. Whereas actually what you're doing is you're just taking a pick on a guy who's probably not going to make it.
Yeah, they wanted a 7th round. This isn't the first time they've done it. They wanted a 7th round pick that can make it safely onto their practice squad, so they wouldn't waste developmental time. I'm not sure that NFL teams have the roster spot for 3 quarterbacks. Now, should you have the roster spot for 3 quarterbacks when you have the most fragile quarterback in the NFL? Probably. However, I will make this point to you. Miami is not the right environment for a lot of players. And it's certainly, if you have a reality series kind of culture around you.
Yeah, I get that. I do get that.
It's not. It's not.
What I would hope from Sanders, and look, this is a question only that Shedeur Sanders can answer. What I hope for him is that what happened at the weekend was humbling, was probably embarrassing, I think, for him, and was disappointing and upsetting. And we have to remember that this is a 22-year-old kid. Who's been brought up in a lifestyle that he's been brought up with his dad as the arguably one of the great players in NFL.
When it was Josh Rosen, we frowned upon it, but now with Shedeur Sanders, we gotta support it and encourage it. Well, the NFL is very clear on the culture that they want, especially they will, just like you said, they will. Hannibal Lecter, if he runs a 4.2 and is physical, he might get drafted in the first day.
I think Josh Rosen, the son of millionaire bankers, was financially entitled. I think that Sanders was financially and culturally entitled. And I think that's a difference. And I think that even, when was Rosen? 10 years ago? I think society is it's very different even now in 2025 than it was when Josh Rosen was drafted. And I think that significantly worse.
It's worse. And worse. Making it more. I think that this is my thought process on Shedeur. I'm not a huge fan of the skill set, number one. Yeah. Do I think he should be a 5th round pick? No, he's not a 5th round pick. But he has a David Fales-esque arm. It's okay. It's just okay. And he's got other traits that are really admirable, but the arm is, to me, something that I just can't get past.
But in the 5th round, you're looking at a guy that could, in that Cleveland quarterback room, if he, and it goes to the point I just made about humbling himself, if he really wants to do this, if he really wants to be committed, and he just drops all the peripheral stuff, all the rah-rah stuff, all the kind of the ooh-la-la stuff, if he does that and just focuses on being an NFL quarterback, I think he's an absolute legitimate NFL starting quarterback.
Mm-hmm. But my point is, this was a message to the entire NIL culture of these young men. You want to have these Twitches and streams and reality series and dates, date models. We could tolerate it for other positions, but a quarterback, absolutely not. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in this league because the quarterbacks are the face of these franchises, and they don't want their quarterbacks distracted. In fact, I remember there was an era with the Miami Dolphins where they wanted their quarterbacks married. Yeah, they didn't want them dating. They wanted them married so that they could be completely settled and have no distractions in these Miami streets. This is the reality.
Yeah,
This is what it is.
I mean, I think you can find trouble in any American city, you know. I mean, I've been to enough of them to know that.
Yeah, but it's really easy to find trouble here.
Yeah, sure.
I can go to Publix and find trouble here. So it's Publix is a grocery store for those who don't know.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, and it depends on my area. You want me to go to Publix in Brickell or downtown? Yeah. It's a lot of trouble there.
Yeah.
So you know, let's turn the page from Shedeur.
Yeah.
They didn't need this circus. They really didn't. For a practice squad quarterback, a number 3 quarterback, they didn't need the circus. And I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I didn't want these guys selecting a quarterback. They have no business doing that. Let the next people select the quarterback. You should be focused on your survival. I thought a lot of and yours, I feel like it was just a throw-in pick.
Yeah.
They just looked at their board and they're like, what's left? All right, quarterback, we need a third. Let's go get him instead of signing some undrafted player. The 3 nose tackles, defensive tackles. Let's get to the Zach Biggers, the Jordan Phillips, the Kenneth Grant. I think I shared this with you. Jordan Phillips was literally the first person anybody ever talked to me about in the 2025 draft. I don't know if it was because of the irony of my situation with the Jordan Phillips of previous name, but they were like, yeah, he's going to be a really good fit for this team. And then Kenneth Grant, we discussed this previously. I started watching Mason Graham and became more obsessed with Kenneth Grant, or at least from the games that I saw, because I saw Grant doing the heavy lifting, and I looked at it from the standpoint, I want the guy who does the heavy lifting. I don't want the guy who's beaten 1 because the other guy's taken on 2.
Yeah.
How did you evaluate those selections, and why 3 nose tackles in your opinion?
I mean, it's clear that that's what they want. I mean, they're all very. I mean, especially the first 2, Grant and Phillips. I mean, Grant is just 21. Phillips is still 20. So, and I put in the draft book that I liked Phillips a lot. His tape was pretty compelling. I mean, there's obviously some stuff that he needs to learn to get off blocks quicker, but he's quick. He stays low. He's only 20, like I said, and I felt like he was that kind of classic Howie Roseman pick in the sort of 3rd or 4th round that the Eagles then turn into somebody who gets a $60-70 million contract from somebody else after helping them on a Super Bowl run. He felt like that kind of player. The issue for me about certainly the 2 of them, and actually really certainly about Grant, is the opportunity cost on a Kenneth Grant. I did some work this morning, just went back and thought to myself, look, here's a safe, solid pick as a 2-down, which is really essentially what he is. He's a 2-down, an early down run stuffing nose tackle that helps Zach Sealer make tackles, make sacks, those sorts of things. But I looked at situationally, you go back and you look at, and when was the last time that a 2-down defensive tackle was taken that early? And I went all the way through and I looked at guys like Mazzie Smith and I worked out that it wasn't even Ron Page or Danny Shelton. You had to go back to 2012 to Dontari Poe being taken 11th overall by the Chiefs. That's the last time.
Vita Vea.
Well, Vita Vea he stays on his 3-down.
He became a 3-down.
There was significantly more pass rush juice in Vea's game than there is in Grant's. And I saw a number of games, and I think to games against like Arkansas State and Central Michigan, where he's being one-on-one handled by centers at that level in obvious pass rushing situations, and that concerns me. That what you're trying to do, and we've discussed this before, you and I, you're trying to get home with 4 internally, and you're trying to flood those 2nd and 3rd levels with players and allow those 4 guys up front to try and get home so that you don't have to blitz. It's how the Eagles won the Super Bowl, is how successful they were. If Grant has to consistently come out on 3rd down because he can't rush the passer, or he can't rush the passer enough because he doesn't have enough pass rush juice, that is a concern. And essentially you're drafting at 13 a guy that you're only going to use in 2 downs.
Okay, put a pin in that. In that. What's suppose I give you an interior front line that is Bradley Chubb, Jalen Phillips, anchored by Zach Sealer as the interior, the 0, and Chop Robinson roaming around.
Yep.
Doesn't it work?
Well, it absolutely works. But what then happens if I mean, who's rushing inside against a Gardner center? Is that the 244 pound?
I think they're starting in a 3-man front. A Chop is moving around, cherry picking what situation he's going to come where.
So one of them, at least one of them, is going to be doubled. So who's that?
I don't know. I don't know. But you pick. The defense is going to have to pick. But the offense is going to have to pick.
Sure.
And it's going to be hard to double it with Chop moving around, because I think Chop is best when he is a elephant in the room, where he's moving around and he's figuring out where he's going to rush from.
Yeah, you want to go back to that. Yeah, you want to go back to that old Tiger formation that they used to run with Jason Taylor, where he used to blitz from different to pressure from different places. But the point about that is that, you look at Phillips and you look at Chubb. That's a pair of 260-pound linemen coming off back-to-back significant. Chubb will not have played football for almost 2 years.
No question.
Jalen is coming. And they're both really good players. I love Jalen as well. But Jalen's coming off 2 significant injuries, worst possible injuries that you could give.
No question, no doubt about it. You're 100% right. But talent-wise, I don't really worry about, and this might sound like a defense of the draft picks. I had more of a priority. I already got Zach Sealer. I already got a double-digit sack guy. I need a guy who's going to take on 2. I need a guy who's going to occupy guys. I need a guy who can work on twists and stunts, because I have my rushers. Now, if one of them goes down, which more than likely one of them goes down, then we've got to have a Mohamed Kamara or a Willie Gay, somebody step up, or Quentin Bell, Graham Murphy. Somebody's going to step up. Somebody's going to have to step up. I mean, that's just the reality of the NFL today. But my bigger concerns is not third down. My bigger concerns is first and second down, because you can't get to a good third down without stopping the run. And that when I looked at the defense last year, that was my bigger issue, especially when you look at these linebackers now with Jordan Brooks and Terrell Dodson. They're both weak side linebackers. Yep. Neither one of them have the instincts really to be a sniff it out, run stuffing, hole clogging, but at least now you have defensive linemen that can keep them clean. So we're going to see what that can be.
Don't get me wrong. I think Grant is a good player. I think he's an excellent player, actually.
Who would you pick instead of him?
I probably would have taken Nolan. I've got to say. I just think
but you were a Walter Nolan is a better.
I was.
Yeah. But you don't have the metrics on Walter Nolan. You don't have the workouts on Walter Nolan.
No, but I'm not. I'm less concerned about workout numbers for an interior defensive lineman than than I would be for a corner or than I would be for a corner or an edge rusher or a receiver or whatever. So I just look. I think Grant will be a good player. He's a baby. He's 21. He's going to do some of that clogging up. Hopefully, he can help the guys at the second level, and hopefully, the more. I mean, I know that he's played in the 380s. I know that there's a lot of there's still a lot of bad. Yeah, he's been in the 370s, 380s. Yeah, wow. Which is not amazing, but I know he's.
I heard like 350. It depends. I have to see him when in person, live in pads, practice.
Yeah, I've seen him. I've seen him up close. And there was some bad weight, but he's an interior defense.
I looked at him. I looked at him on Friday. It looks clearly he's in the best shape he's ever been in his life.
And to be absolutely fair, and again, look, the people will be in the comments going, I don't hate him at all. I think he's an absolute Planet Theory kid. This is a kid who was asked for his birth certificate, when he was 8 years old by opposition parents, because they just thought he was they thought he was an adult.
Well, what I found weird? Both of his parents, they're regular sized people.
Yeah,
which
crazy, isn't it?
Like it's like they're and this is not to be disrespectful, but neither one of them looked like they produce an NFL player. And usually the parents of an NFL player look like they produced an NFL player.
Certainly not a 6'4", 331-pound NFL player. But the interesting thing about what the Michigan Star said was that they felt like he was the best conditioned big man they've ever been around, which I think is some statement for a guy that does have some bad weight on him. And I think what I suspect is that the Dolphins are hoping that there's enough that they can get enough sort of early down pass rush juice out of him as well, because the NFL is not run on first down, run on second down, throw on third down anymore. It's a very different game. So I think that's what they're hoping. And I think if that pans out, as it potentially could do, then I think, he's going to be a very sound, very solid pick. He is a good player. He is a very good player with excellent upside. I
would have went Zabel. And then I wouldn't have had the desperation to trade up.
Yeah, this is the problem, I think, as well. They, and I think we both agree on this. They ultimately backed themselves into a corner with these two first selections. They had to do this with the offensive lineman and the defensive lineman because of the way that they've handled the roster, the way that they've ignored the offensive line historically, and the fact that during free agency they ignored the defensive tackle position. They had three positions that they had to hit on: cornerback, offensive line, defensive tackle, and they decided that DT and guard were the ones that they were going to go for. But they are, they conspired to form their own downfall, if you like. That they back themselves into this position.
I think they also feel like, and this was very consistent from day one of the NFL draft. Chris Grier was like, "Yeah, we're not worried about cornerback. We feel like we can get one in free agency, one if not two in free agency, and we feel like." Teams that have had success with late round cornerbacks, we've had success with late round cornerbacks, we've had success with undrafted cornerbacks. We could find a cornerback. That was the sentiment, and sentiment day one, day two, day three. So Jason Marshall, I felt like he was a throw. He was not we're desperate. We gotta, because if you're desperate, you don't trade away your third. You don't trade away your first pick in the third day.
If you've watched Jason Marshall as well, I mean, he's a height, weight, speed guy, but for a team that, he is a no effort guy. If the play does not go near him, he does not care one iota about it. He is, and also he just has a fundamental lack of understanding about finding the football and where the ball is. But
I disagree with you. I think he has a lot of batted down balls. Sometimes I prefer the cornerback that goes for the deflection. I am a ball hawk. I do want the ball, but sometimes I think there's value, especially earlier in your career, in knocking the ball down, being in position and knocking the ball down.
His consistency, I find, just and the lack of effort for me, just on tape, it was just like if this play is not going anywhere near him, he is not remotely interested, and that to me,
those are things. What I love about that selection is you see 5-star talent.
Yeah,
you see a guy who is not resting on his laurels anymore. He's woken up and realized, damn, this athleticism is only going to take me so far. I have to put in the work now and be disciplined in order to maximize if I want to keep living this lifestyle, if I want to keep having opportunities. Now, you could take a guy like Cam Smith, who has the ability and just doesn't have the work ethic. Does having two of them on the same team with very little leadership in the cornerback room, does that help you? No, it doesn't. But I do want the traits. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I completely. I look. There's two starting cornerback jobs up for grabs. Somebody's going to have to take them, and maybe that is Marshall, but he's going to have to change significantly from the tape that I saw at Florida.
What did you think about Dante? I think it was Fowler, the Trader. Dante. Why do I keep calling him Fowler? Dante Trader, the safety from Maryland.
Yeah, I like him actually. I liked his tape. This is a kind of hardworking, high character team leader. He was an incredible lacrosse player in high school. I think he was the number 5 ranked lacrosse player coming out of high school. And I liked his tape. I thought he was a really good zone defender, good football intelligence. Isn't afraid to come down into the box against the run. He's a good tackler, rarely misses tackles. Experience. He had 36 starts. I thought he was just one of the better defenders I saw last season in the Big Ten, and it was always around the football. The issue for me was that he turned up at the combine and had a terrible performance. His relative athletic score, his RAS was 212, which is abysmal.
What do you run?
I don't have it in front of me, but he didn't perform very well. And so the concern, and people say, "Oh, well, I much prefer tape over running around in shorts," and I totally understand that. But then there is a reason, for example, why Xavier Restrepo went undrafted, and that's because he ran in the 4.8s. So timing and workout stuff does matter. But I think that he comes into a kind of a clouded situation with, there are question marks about it. They've clearly got bodies. They clearly like Ashton Davis. Elijah Campbell's kicked around. Melifonwu obviously can do some things, but McMorris is around, and he goes into that mix. So
yeah.
I thought he was a decent player.
I was trying to look up what he ran, but obviously these websites have different. Yeah. When we talked to him, because I don't get the opportunity, and I didn't go to the combine, so I didn't have the opportunity. Didn't go to the Senior Bowl, didn't go to the combine. Probably going to have to recalibrate whether or not I want to do those things moving forward. Just because when you get exposure to players, one, I believe you have to see a quarterback throw in person. I believe you have to see players in person. It helps the process, and then two, when you get exposure to the players, you kind of start to fall in love, which you could tell. The Dolphins really, really liked all the players that they selected. It's a personality trait that was a very commonality. Very personable kids. Trader, man, very impressive when we talked to him.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yeah, and I was just like, wow, I could definitely see the appeal. And there were so many commonalities in terms of the personality of the players that they selected. Also, they wanted people young. They wanted young
and that's what they've got. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. So I've got the numbers here. So he ran a 4.65 at the Maryland Pro Day, which, you had on the Pro Day tax. That is a slow time. So he didn't run the combine.
I can tell you what you're not supposed to run less than a 4.54 as a safety.
Yeah. I mean, 4.65 with the Pro Day tax is probably a 4.70 at the combine. He had a 31-inch vertical, a 9.9 broad jump. He
didn't run at the combine?
He didn't run at the combine, no. 31 vertical, 9.9 broad jump, 7.09 3 cone. He did 12 on the bench and a 4.32 short shuttle. So
okay, well, I'm not going to make the excuse. Those are not good numbers.
No, but
I will say this: maybe he was playing lacrosse as opposed to training for the combine.
Maybe. I think he gave lacrosse up, but.
I don't know. I'll get to the bottom of it. And bottom line is, he's here. I'll watch him on the field. Yeah. I could tell you in a short time span whether.
What I like about him, and what I think we've and the other guys will like about him, is he's a really smart kid. He's a really smart kid. You can just tell. He's calling out things before the snap. He's all over the place. He's pointing out what needs to happen here, there, and so I think that football intelligence will serve him well.
Now, get to one of my favorite picks, the running back, Ollie Gordon. What were your impressions when you evaluated him? I cannot be honest with you. I didn't really look at running backs because I knew they would draft one, but I figured he'd just be thrown on the pile. I didn't know you'd end up with the Doak Walker Award winner.
Yeah. I mean, I thought his tape was pretty compelling in 2023.
Why didn't he come out?
I think he just decided that he wanted to stay for the extra year and just make the most of the NIL money and those sorts of things. And he clearly had a not a particularly good year. And I think some of it was down to the offensive line and the bad quarterback play. But I think some of it was a little bit down to, his own performances. And it wasn't necessarily because, when I did a deeper dive, it wasn't because he was facing, excessively overloaded boxes. Teams weren't necessarily selling out to stop the run at all costs. So actually, when conditions were more favorable for him to carry the ball effectively, he was just unable to get going. He's quite high cut. I think he's quite stiff in his hips.
He just runs a little up high.
Yeah, he runs like a giraffe. I mean, it's like one scout said to me, it's like trying to tackle a giraffe. And, he can get out of tackles. And that's the thing that I found so compelling in the 2023 tape, was how he was able to get out of tackles. Because he's a big, long strider. He's quite a linear athlete, and he does have some stiffness in those ankles.
I was quite, when I saw him physically, and I haven't seen him physically, but when I saw him like in his draft announcement, and I looked at the body, and understand I do this for a living, I was kind of a little bit bothered or perplexed why he's not more cut than that.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, interesting for a power back, 6'2", 225. But what I do like is that he has the running style that Mike McDaniel wants: one cut, jump cut, decisive. That's Mike McDaniel's go-to, and really they need a very specific back. They need a power back, and I don't think Damian Martinez was selected at that point. I'm not 100% sure, but he was still available in the 5th round when the Dolphins had their run at all those 5th round players. But
he didn't run a good time either. I mean, he ran a 4.61 at the combine, which is not great.
Yeah.
So that is an issue. And just, I'm sure they'll have asked him why his production fell off so much in 2024. And that's the speed thing for me is, and it's the one thing I noted in the draft book was, when you're trying to get him to run outside zone as a 4.61 runner, that is the concern for you. I don't think he's a particularly good in pass protection. But I think he's got decent hands. I think he can, you said it, short yardage. He's 6'1", 233. That's really going to be,
they need a hammer.
They need a hammer, and I think he's the hammer.
Yeah, no. Obviously, this is still Devon Achane's backfield. Jalen Wright knows the offense, so he's going to have the opportunity in his second year. I can honestly tell you, I don't know why he fell off. He had opportunity after opportunity, and then they just benched him. So. Clearly when coaches do that, and I have the highest opinion for Eric Studesville, the kid's just not doing something that he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and it became pretty clear that his pass protection was struggling, and he couldn't effectively run routes other than little flare routes and little Texas routes, and I think that to me just was a tip off for defensive coordinators. When he's in the game, he's either getting it or he's not a part of the play at all. And if he is just in the backfield, not a part of the play, then we can blitz because he's not going to be able to pick it up. And I think that's what teams, as the season went on, they got more and more taping and thought, okay,
yeah, I never thought about that. Yeah,
it's either going to be a handoff to Wright, or he's not involved in the play. And if he is involved in the play, it's in pass protection. So why don't we send an extra guy because he's not going to be able to? That to me was what I picked up on as the season went on. I just felt like, he needs to work. And I've seen some of the photos. He's clearly bulked up in the off season. And I hope that
fans always fall in love with all of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't class myself necessarily as a fan per se, but I know that he's working on some of the things because I had a conversation with somebody who knows him through his high school coach, that he's working hard away from the facility on doing better in the things that he struggled with last year, which is running routes and protecting the quarterback. Because actually, when he was at Tennessee, I thought he did a pretty decent job in pass protection, but it didn't quite look the same last year. And it's obviously much more different when you're blocking a safety from Vanderbilt, who's a one-star kid who's going to be ending up working in, on Wall Street in 5 years time.
Don't be disrespectful to Vanderbilt like
versus trying to block, Antoine Winfield or Harrison Smith or guys like that. There's a big difference. So yeah.
Get to the final draftee that we haven't talked about, Quinn Ewers. What's your opinion there? I'm not a huge fan, but I know what it is. You basically want a guy who can learn your offense and execute and run your practice squad. What was your evaluation of him coming into the draft?
Yeah, it just felt like a guy to me. There were some massive highs, and I go back to 2023, when he first came to Texas, and I look at the Alabama game, I look at the Michigan game, and I think I can remember thinking at the time, okay, this kid's now taking a step up that we've all been waiting for. But actually, there were just so many lows and frustrating injuries, and you combine that sort of maddening inconsistency with the injuries. And he just was never quite the sum of his parts. And I often ask myself these kind of key questions. If I was going to put a kind of a big time group of 4 quarterback into a small FBS team with 1 and 2 star talent at the skill positions, can he elevate those players?
Elevate? Oh, that's a great question.
Can he elevate the players around him? And if I draft him, therefore, is he capable of being more than the sum of the parts of the offense? Will he be a kind of, we've used this word before, will he be a force multiplier in those big moments, put a team on his shoulders, carry them down the field to a win? And I never thought that he was going to be the guy that could do that. And yet there are smaller school quarterbacks out there who I thought if you could put in those bigger situations, he wouldn't flounder. There wouldn't be the same inconsistency that he had. He's throwing to 5-star guys being protected by 5-star guys. And so that was a concern for me with and I thought very specifically there were fundamental technical issues that of course they will work on and they'll probably get out, but then it makes you think like, okay, Sark is a really good coach. Why can't the Texas coaches iron out some of these issues. So there was a lack of urgency. I don't think he's intentional necessarily as a passer in the way that I want my quarterback to be. I think he misses some of the landmarks in his drops. I know he had the hip injury, and that may have taken some of the zip off his passes and his delivery, but I think he has an underwhelming arm.
9,000 passing yards, though.
Yeah, but then, look at
percentage.
I mean, look at Graham Harrell and look at, historically, all those quarterbacks who've thrown for a 1 billion-yard Case Keenum and, all those Ty Detmer.
I would have went Brady Cook, but that's
just I think Cook has some upside. Look, I think he's a good kid. I think Ewers is a good kid, and he'll be a practice squad quarterback. I just don't think, I couldn't think of a situation where the Dolphins put him in the game if Tua's out for long term and he gets promoted from the practice squad and Zach Wilson gets hurt and he comes in. I'm not thinking, okay, this is the future. Then that's the
I don't have lofty expectations for 7th round picks because in my mind here's what I've concluded 7th round picks are. Those are the guys that are still on your board that you would like, that you don't want to compete with others to sign as undrafted players.
Yeah.
You don't want to just compete with somebody else and get into a bidding war. So you just like, let me draft them. But that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be on your roster because the 7th round pick is, they're about as close to a camp body as it gets. Let's get into the undrafted guys. You could name any of them. You could tell me Larry Brown got drafted, and I wouldn't know because I don't care. Because I don't learn their names. I don't want to hear how good they were. I don't want to hear what he runs. I don't care. I know a guy generally makes the team. A guy or two generally makes the team. But I will wait until I actually watch practice. And when he starts making plays with the third team, offense or defense, then I'll say, I'll notate that number. I learned the number more than once. I see the number more than once. I might try to learn your name. I've done this for 17 years, and I am not emotionally getting invested in undrafted players. Yeah. But who would you say is the guy that could be your Preston Williams?
So I think there's 6 players potentially who've got a shot at making the roster from those UDFA.
Give them to me. I'm gonna write them down, and I'm gonna look at the 6 just because you said so. I won't learn their name, but I will look at the 6.
You get that pen ready. So the first guy is Andrew. So I think there's 2 receivers and a tight end straight away. Okay, the 2 receivers are Andrew Armstrong of Arkansas, who I was amazed didn't get drafted. I thought he was a rock solid 3rd day pick. Now he'll turn 25 early in the season, which obviously capped his ceiling, but he led the SEC in receiving yards and receptions last year. So
yeah, I know he was for. People are like, "Oh, you need to know him." I was like,
he scored only once, so touchdown production isn't amazing, but he's got good hands. He runs good routes in that short and intermediate area. He gains quick and easy separation. He ran a 4.37. He understands timing and tempo in terms of his routes, and I think he's the sort of guy that can quickly become Tua's best friend on late downs because of how hard he works and how continually his tape showed him getting open on money downs. He also is an excellent blocker out on the perimeter. He's not afraid to get his hands dirty in the running game. And I had one scout who sat in on an interview with him at the combine who said that he had told Armstrong in the interview had said, so he was asked, what is your favorite play that you made at college? And most of them say it was a big touchdown or it was a big this or it was a big throw or whatever. Yeah. He said that his favorite play was after a fumble and one of his teammates fumbled. He had to chase down a defensive back 70 yards and tackle him near the goal line, which kind of underlines the mentality. I think he's a guy that has a shot at making the team. The other receiver is Theo Wees. He was the number 3, so another 5-star kid. He was the number 3 overall receiver out of high school. Spent 4 years at Oklahoma. He's had some injuries, but he was Luther Burden's foil on the other side. He's 6'2", 202. Armstrong is 6'3", almost 6'4", 202. So these are big guys. He gets open a lot. Again, he's older. He ran a slowish time. He ran a 4.56 at the combine, but he doesn't look like a speed guy. But he did a great job, and this is how I think he might work in this offense, is that he did a great job making use of those manufactured touches, stacks, bunches in the slot, all of those sorts of things, comebacks. The tape is flush with him creating separation on all sorts of routes. He's available for the quarterback. And I think he is, again, and these 2 guys, both of them make up leadership, all of those things, FBI, really important. And I think that's kind of run its way through these UDFA guys and actually the draft class. the guy that I think is the absolute home run hit in terms of what they did is Jalen Conyers, the tight end out of Texas Tech. Now, 2 double transfer, played freshman year at Oklahoma, spent 3 years at Arizona State, went to the Red Raiders. I mean, he's the kind of Dollar General Tyler Warren in terms of what he does. He had loads of plays as a runner. He played quarterback out of the Wildcat. He ran 22 times for 92 yards and a touchdown. He threw a touchdown against Baylor.
Sounds like an H-back.
Yeah, in 20. Well, except that he's 6'4", 267. In 2023, he had 9.6 yards after the catch. By comparison, Brock Bowers averaged 8.7 after the catch. Now, he's not necessarily a speedy vertical threat, but he gets open. He's not snappy necessarily at the top of his stem, but he's got good hands. He's a good pass blocker. He's 267 pounds. And I just think, there are some lackadaisical reps on tape, and his route running can be, a little average at times. But to me, there's just upside and developmental upside for somebody that's 6'4", 267 pounds, and you can use him in a few different ways. I mean, that to me is so. And then defensively, I think the Asante kid at the linebacker, who is the brother of Larry Asante, I think he's got a chance to be that kind of Duke Riley kind of guy. I mean, he's a high character, multi-year team captain, plays 110 miles an hour on every down. He ran 4.48 at the combine. He's violent. He's physical. His tape is full of valuable reps in coverage. He's a really strong special teamer, and I think that's where he'll make hay. And then the John Saunders kid at Ole Miss, who was a high school receiver. So he played 3 seasons at Miami of Ohio as a receiver, then transferred to Ole Miss. He's got NFL lineage. His cousin is Jaquan Brisker, the Bears safety. I was really shocked that he was not drafted. Sometimes he bites the cheese a little bit and takes the eye candy, but he is so aggressive. He is so aggressive. He just comes out and he punches people in the mouth. He will smash through double teams. I saw him against Georgia. Dominic Lovett caught a screen. He just blasted through a guard and a tight end and just almost took Lovett's head off. He can pass off guys in zone. He positions himself really well. He has a good understanding of the third level. But the thing I like about him so much is he punches the ball out of runners' hands all the time. I've got it here. Arkansas, Oklahoma, Cincinnati, Wake Forest last year. Those kind of peanut punches. He's a strong safety with some versatility, and I wouldn't be surprised if he makes the team. And then the other guy that I think is quite interesting is the Josh Preeb kid at Michigan, the guard. I think he's got a chance potentially as a fundamentally sound, and look, we're in a situation where Liam Eichenberg is our 6th offensive lineman potentially. So I think Preeb has got a chance of, pushing that. I think he's that kind of Ryan Hayes kind of mentality.
I can't remember if I paid attention to him and when I watched Michigan, if he stood out. I don't think he did, but yeah.
I just think he's got a chance in an average room.
Yeah. Oh, it's an average room. All right. Yeah.
It is.
It's.
I think some of those 2 receivers, and the tight end, I think have got a real shot.
Mm-hmm. All right. So overall, Simon, you what would you give the grade of the Dolphins draft?
A B-, C+ kind of.
Yeah, I'm a B- kind of guy because I like the 3rd round pick, but just like you said, Chris Grier conducted himself like he's a man who's very confident in his stature and position, and I actually admire that trait about him. I mean, he doesn't do desperate things. So, and I hate the fact that fans have this perception that he's like a liar. He's not a liar. I've been around a lot of disingenuous people. He's not a liar. If he tells you that 3 executives, hit him, oh, you took our guy. Because I do believe that Kenneth Grant was going to be a top 15 selection. I know somebody in NFL front office who said, yeah, we probably planned on taking him. So it's, it wasn't like they were targeting him, but based on how the board was falling, they were like, okay, this is a guy that's in play. To me, it was Zabel, Barron, Grant. And and I can understand why they didn't go Barron, because one, you didn't go Will Johnson, and if I feel like Will Johnson's going to be there in the second day because of whatever knee issues, and I didn't support them taking him in the second day. I don't know what the knee issues are, but very clear and apparent that there were. And they just had a conviction that they were going to be good at cornerback, and hopefully that plan pans out for them. And then to me, I would have went Zabel and then picked a defensive tackle in round 2. But I understood where they were. They couldn't be left empty-handed because I also wrote the day of the draft, Steve Ross, fire everybody if you exit this draft and Liam Eichenberg's still a starter. Just don't even waste time.
I think they got 2 legitimate starters with their first 2 picks. They have to be starters. I think they got a kid who potentially has massive upside in Phillips, who could be something really special, but I think he's the second youngest player in the draft behind Dylan Sampson. So he's going to be potentially a second contract player. And I think that they got some value with undrafted free agents. And then on top of that, they got a 3rd next year. And then with Javon Holland, they almost certainly got a 4th next year because of the qualifying thing that happened yesterday with Ogba, which means he didn't cancel out the Holland thing. So you're essentially looking at a draft next year with a 1 or 2, 2 3s, 2 4s. So if you take the bigger picture, then I'm probably a B-. And if a couple of those undrafted free agents work out, then that's a very solid B-. But you need those first 2 guys to really perform, early and often. And Grant needs to show potential pass rushing juice that maybe hasn't quite shown, or to be that absolute oak tree that just holds up inside and allows Zach to do work and allows Chop to do work. And allows
I have more of an issue with Jonah. The evaluation, the talent, there's a lot of projection, and a lot because you play tackle, but there's athleticism there. Mike McDaniel said he loves the way that he can anchor as a pass blocker. That's great. We don't have any durability concerns. We just need to see it. I always feel uncomfortable when we're projecting a guy doing something we haven't really seen him do on a high level in college.
You have to ask me.
If we did Kelvin Banks, we'd be doing the same thing. So
I think you have to ask whether or not it was worth taking a guy that is a projection like Savanier, who you're going to have to move from outside in, or whether or not you could have just stayed where you were and taken the Ratledge kid from Georgia, for example. He went off, who is a pure guard, who is tough and nasty team leader, who went off the board 3 picks later, out of 5 picks later, or whatever it was. So I think that's a question that you're going to have to ask. But
so Ratledge was your 10th guy, because I never ever got anybody to really clarify. Everybody had a different guy as their 10th guy. Savanier was the 9th guy. Everybody gave me a different name for offensive lineman. But
I think he's got a real chance to be a good starting caliber, guard. But he's got to start. We can't go into the season with Liam Eichenberg as a starter. And maybe they can add a veteran free agent guy to compete for that role. But I think there's a fairly clear path. And I think probably, I don't know what you think about this, Omar, and it'll be one to watch in mini camp and certainly as we get into training camp. But I don't think you can line Savanier up next to Patrick Paul.
No, you cannot. You have to swap it, and you have to put
Daniels is going to play the left side.
You can't have 2 inexperienced. I've been here doing this long enough. I already know you can't have 2 inexperienced players.
You've got to have the vet with the rookie at left tackle. And
you have to vet with rookie.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's the beauty of the flexibility of Daniels as well, that he brings you. You can play both sides, and indeed he can play center. So, I mean, look, a starting offensive line of Paul, Savanier, Brewer. Paul, Daniels, Brewer, Savanier, and Jackson is better than it was. So,
it's better than it was. Is it good enough?
That's the question. The question.
But your depth is worse than it was.
Your depth is significantly worse.
Yeah,
it's significantly worse. So
we shall see. On that note, Simon, it's always a pleasure. Look forward to doing draft talks, and we'll talk again when we start to see the talent. I'll share some of my thoughts when I actually see the players on the field. But we got a long journey to making this team whole, and they still have free agents, and they've been talking to us. Well, we're going to be aggressive in the 3rd wave of free agency. Well, now today, officially, the compensatory picks aren't factored into the equation. So let's see you address some of these needs. Oh, they actually don't even have roster spots right now. So
no, they don't. But it'd be interesting to see which of the UDFAs are actually just camp invites, because I don't think that's necessarily being made clear. As it's
I
think they're actually invites.
And after rookie camp, they always cut one and sign a tryout guy. I
think they'll probably bring in some tryout quarterbacks as well, and some what it's like. There's some kids that turn up and you're like, where's this guy come from? And he's but yeah, we shall see. Long road ahead, but yeah, it could have been worse. It could have been better, but it could have been worse. And you probably take that as where we are now.
All right. Simon Clancy, you can find him SI Clancy on Twitter streets. Did an amazing draft guide. I'm going to retweet out all his evaluations of the draft prospects. I know he did it, but I never got to see some of your stuff on Trader and the running back. We were just too busy. But you got to hear
already for next year.
Yeah, no. Long road ahead for you, my friend. All right, good to talk to you. You've been watching Dolphins in Depth, and we'll be back later on this week.